A state-guaranteed title deed provides certainty on paper, but the physical reality, like this grave marker settling, can override the register. Kenya's Limitation of Actions Act provides a mechanism for the mechanical transfer of land from the registered proprietor to a trespasser. Practitioners should note that this statutory bar is distinct from the doctrine of laches. It imposes a rigid deadline that ignores the subjective fairness of any delay in filing a suit. This principle was tested and affirmed in the 2026 appellate case, Ishmael Joram v. Ephantus Muriithi Obadiah. The dispute centered on a registered owner who attempted to reclaim land from an occupant who had farmed and developed the soil for decades. Possession remains the lifeblood of Kenyan land rights. A title deed is a perishable asset that begins to expire the moment the owner loses physical control of the soil. The Joram case originated with a 1961 transaction where a buyer paid for a portion of land and immediately took possession. The parties failed to secure Land Control Board consent. Because the Land Control Act requires this approval for agricultural land, the agreement became legally void. This diagram tracks the shift. When the lack of consent voided the contract, the buyer's status transitioned from a legal purchaser to a trespasser, even though they never left the land. This loss of legal permission created the hostile environment necessary for adverse possession. The clock started the moment the contract was nullified. Because the owner did not immediately evict the buyer after the agreement failed, the 12-year statutory countdown began. A voided contract manufactures the exact conditions for a squatter to acquire the title. It strips away the owner's permission, making the occupant's presence adverse to the title. To succeed, a claimant must satisfy the NEC trilogy. The occupation must be peaceable, open to public view, and conducted without the owner's permission. In the Joram case, the occupant met these criteria by farming the land in plain sight for decades without violent resistance. This agricultural transformation, like the mature coffee bushes shown here, provides the open and notorious evidence proving the owner had constructive notice. The doctrine also requires animus possidendi, the specific mental intent to hold the land as the true owner to the exclusion of everyone else. Courts look for physical manifestations of this intent, such as building permanent homes or planting long-term cash crops. Within Kenyan law, establishing a family cemetery serves as the highest form of evidence for this hostile intent. As the structural pins for coffee and homes drop on the Joram plot, it is the burial of the occupant's wife and children that signals a permanent displacement of the paper owner. Physical acts of absolute permanence override theoretical control. Establishing a grave constitutes an effective entry that the legal system cannot ignore. Absentee owners often attempt to defend their boundaries through paper protests, relying on documentation rather than physical presence. The chronometric clock of adverse possession tracks the 12-year period mandated by Cap 22. The owner in the Joram case issued demand letters and verbal warnings, but as these icons suggest, the law treats such protests as ineffective. The clock continues to run. In 1978, the owner filed a lawsuit for the cost of damaged trees, believing this legal action would stop the timer. The efficacy of that lawsuit is governed by the rule established in Joseph Kachumi Kiritu. The Kiritu precedent mandates that to stop the clock, an owner must either physically retake the land or file a suit specifically for the recovery of possession. Since the 1978 suit only sought financial damages and not the eviction of the occupant, it failed to interrupt the statutory countdown. Symbolic letters and peripheral lawsuits carry no weight. Without a suit for recovery of the land, the owner effectively acquiesces to the loss of their property. By the time the Joram case reached the Court of Appeal in 2026, the statutory timeline had long since expired. Section 7 of the Limitation of Actions Act imposes a total bar on recovery actions after the 12-year period. Section 13 clarifies that this timer runs so long as an adverse party remains in possession. Section 17 provides the finality. Once the 12-year period ends, the law mandates that the title of the original owner is extinguished. Under Section 38, the occupant then has the right to petition the High Court to be registered as the new absolute proprietor. The statute functions with mechanical indifference. Once that 12-year deadline passes, the law offers no reprieve for the paper owner's absence. This strict interpretation creates a significant gap between legal ownership and the traditional concept of fairness in property deals. The financial loss is absolute. When a title is extinguished via adverse possession, the original owner has no legal right to recover their initial purchase price. This reality creates a high-stakes environment for the Nairobi owner, or diaspora investor who manages land from a distance. The Joram precedent forces a hard look at whether the law places an impossible burden on modern, mobile investors who cannot physically guard their borders. From a constitutional standpoint, the state prioritizes land productivity. The law discourages keeping finite resources idle through absentee capital. Kenyan law demands active physical stewardship. Failing to occupy the land or initiate an eviction suit results in the state treating the property as legally abandoned.